This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hey guys, Karsten here. You know what I love? Dr. Seuss books. And you know what I hate? Dr. Seuss movies. Dr. Seuss is one of the most famous authors of all time, creating timeless classics like Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, Red Fish, Two Fish, One Fish, whatever the f***. Everyone I knew grew up on this man's books because they have this universal appeal that spans across all of his work. So in short, we have a successful thing, right? It's going really well. So what does the world do? It ruins it by turning them into movies because, you gotta make that money. Now, I would like to emphasize that there is a difference between these classic 60s and 70s shorts and this. Those were pretty much literally book to video. If the book was a few pages long, the short was a few minutes long, like it should be. These movies, these features, however, now these are the problem. I'm talking these two awful live-action remakes. I'm talking Horton Hears a Who. I'm talking The Lorax. And of course, I'm talking about the latest example, The Grinch. These movies all span across different levels of mediocrity. I don't want to see any of you f***s coming in here like, oh, but the live-action Grinch was my childhood. The live-action Grinch isn't worth defending, alright? Leave it alone. Accept it. Okay, now back to the point. Some of these aren't necessarily horrible movies, like Horton Hears a Who, and surprisingly, the latest Grinch. I don't mind either of these movies, really. They're not awful, they're just kind of perfectly average. So now you might be thinking, well then what's the problem? If they're not horrible, then what are we here to talk about? Well, you see, the original books are classics, they're masterpieces, and Horton Hears a Who, The Grinch, those aren't masterpieces. In fact, both of those movies are pretty forgettable. Oh, hey, remember that video that I made last week? So me, being the fun film guy who likes to talk about things that aren't worth talking about, is gonna try and figure out what went wrong in the making of these movies, why they aren't as beloved as the original books, as a way of proving that, hey, let's cool it on the Seuss films. You see, these Dr. Seuss movies are never that long. They all last pretty much the same length, falling around a good 90 minutes. That's the average length of a kid's movie, but when we take into consideration how the books are like 65 pages long and each page is just a few words, yeah, 90 minutes is a little much. As I stated earlier, this is why I am a huge advocate for films like the original 1960s Grinch, because it is a direct page-to-video situation. The stories Seuss crafted were carefully put together and made so that children wouldn't get bored of the story, being that children have somewhat of a low attention span. They're stories you could read before going to bed and not make a whole night out of it. He understood pacing, that's why some characters with more depth got one entire book, and others like One Fish, Two Fish were multiple different characters in different scenarios. Boredom was a common theme that I noticed while plowing through these films. The first 15 minutes of each one I was like, oh, this isn't half bad, maybe I don't even need to make this video. But as soon as the first 15 minutes were up and I realized we weren't even through Act 1 yet, I realized I was in for a very long and boring experience. And that pisses me off because Dr. Seuss is the opposite of boring. If you're going to experience a Dr. Seuss reading for 90 minutes, that would probably entail multiple books. In that situation, I probably wouldn't get bored. But these characters and stories were not meant to be stretched out for longer than they needed to be, and as a result you have a series of really boring movies about really interesting characters. Movies will always, naturally, come with a few different protagonists. There are a lot of movies where there are several different people for the audience to connect to rather than just one single person. That being said, Dr. Seuss adaptations are faced with the issue of making a film where there is really only one main character most of the time, not counting the animal sidekicks who can't really speak. This is where these films get annoying and where the authenticity of the original stories loses their touch. This doesn't seem to apply so much to the live-action adaptations as much as it does for the animated ones. When I went to go see The Grinch, we of course had the Grinch as our lead, but the film felt as though it needed to expand and add this entire friend group. There's always been the little girl, but now she has a friend with their own little subplot going on. She has a mom who now has like a whole personality. That kind of sounds horrible, but what I'm getting at is that when you introduce these new personalities that weren't originally there, it means giving them a voice, and Illumination loves writing characters in a way that seems so unnecessarily relatable. So now you might be thinking, what's wrong with relatability? Usually, nothing. But we're talking Dr. Seuss here, okay? This isn't a world where the same rules apply. There's a small scene near the beginning of The Grinch where the mother is making the baby toast and jam, and it's a big ordeal where she's working her hardest to get it all together, and when she finally gives the baby the toast, the baby just kind of makes a mess with it. And while it was a pretty average whatever scene at first, it just didn't feel right with me. It feels like Illumination trying to be like, hey parents, isn't this relatable? When in reality, we're supposed to be viewing this world with childlike wonder because, It's Dr. Seuss. This happens all over the place in these movies. The Lorax is just a whole movie full of these examples. So in short, Dr. Seuss movies should sound like Dr. Seuss movies. They shouldn't sound like shitty jokes that news anchors would say. My last point is somewhat similar to the previous one, but also not really. As I've said numerous times now, Dr. Seuss's books were very universally appealing. Anyone from anywhere could pick one up and enjoy it. I say that because the books were written unlike anything out there. When reading a Dr. Seuss book, it was as though you were speaking in a completely different language. They are their own thing, and they were books that felt as though they were meant to be read out loud. Again, just look at books like Fox and Socks that were meant to be full of tongue twisters. By doing so, these books are making us the storytellers and giving us the Dr. Seuss voice. It's really kind of genius. Fellow video essayist Captain Christian gets into this aspect of his books in more depth in his video, which I will link in the description. While the messages and the creative characters are a vital piece in what makes Seuss books what they are, to me they're only about 50% of it, and that's all that it seems like these movies are picking up on. The other 50% is, like I just said, voice, and these movies have none of that. By turning Dr. Seuss books into movies, you lose that sense of participation. It makes it difficult to connect to these stories because you're not the one reading anything, you're watching it happen in front of you. Not to mention the inconsistency of the way at which the film delivers lines. Sometimes they're rhyming and other times there isn't. It makes the entire piece feel incredibly ingenuine and not fun or immersive for anyone, which is the opposite of what Dr. Seuss was about. So at the end of the day, if you work at a production company and are thinking about adapting some Dr. Seuss book, just don't. It's not really a thing that can be done well, and to be honest, it's impossible to make a good adaptation because they were simply not meant to be adapted. Dr. Seuss wrote stories that were meant to be told forever on the pages, so you know what? Let's just keep it that way. Hey everyone, ignore the mustache, I'm trying not to lose a bet. Before you head out though, I want to give a quick thank you to this week's sponsor, Squarespace. If you have an idea and you want to make it come to life, Squarespace is the place to go, whether it be an online store, a blog, a portfolio. It's great. They have a wide selection of award-winning designer templates that'll make your site look super sleek and simple and sexy. It is just great. Not to mention they have 24-hour customer service just in case you have any problems. Didn't think it could get any better? Well, guess what? It does. If you go to squarespace.com/Karsten, you can get 10% off of your first purchase. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to check out Squarespace, and I'll see you guys in the next one.